The year was 1870, and the frontier was a land of both promise and punishment. It did not wait for the weak. It did not spare the desperate. The desert did not care for the ache in a mother's bones or the thin cries of children. It just kept on stretching, dry, endless, and merciless. Her boots were long past ruined, soles flapping with each step like tongues mocking her misery. Dust clung to the hem of her dress, and her once fair skin had blistered beneath days of unyielding sun. Her arms ached from carrying the baby, a limp bundle of bone and silence. Behind her, the older two stumbled in silence, their steps slower with each mile, lips cracked, eyes empty. She had stopped speaking 2 days ago. Words were a waste of spit. Instead, she focused on the horizon, on that faint curl of smoke she had seen that morning, rising between two buttes like a thread from heaven. She didn't believe in salvation anymore, but she believed in fire. The boy, 9 years old and too small for his age, coughed harshly behind her. She turned instinctively, eyes scanning him. His shoulders slumped forward, one hand gripping his little sister's. The girl was 6, her hair tangled and her dress ripped where it had once been hemmed with care. She didn't cry anymore. Crying took energy. "I see it," the woman croaked, her voice a whisper. "Smoke." The boy didn't respond. He looked, nodded faintly, and kept walking. She pressed forward, the baby against her chest. The child had stopped nursing a day ago. She hadn't produced milk in 3. Hunger carved her from the inside, gnawing like a rat trapped beneath her ribs. She no longer cared if the smoke belonged to a trading post, a trapper, or a Comanche hunting party. Whatever it was, it meant fire. It meant people, and maybe people meant bread. The wind picked up, tugging at her skirts. The desert stretched on, whispering secrets to itself. Sagebrush rustled like dry bones. Somewhere to the west, a coyote yipped and was answered by another. She felt her steps slow. Her knees buckled once, then again. She stopped, blinked against the blur swimming in her vision, then forced herself on. The land sloped upward, a shallow rise leading toward the buttes. The smoke curled lazily behind them, faint and steady. She could smell it now, wood smoke and something else. "Fat. Meat? Come on," she murmured. "Please, babies. Come on." At the top of the rise, her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees. The baby let out a faint whimper, too weak for anything more. The other children stood frozen behind her, swaying like saplings in wind. And then, movement. From the shadows of the rocks below, a figure stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered. A man, mounted, silent as the dusk. His face was painted in shadow, but the outline of his bow was clear against the horizon. A Navajo, by the look of him, or Apache. She couldn't tell, didn't care. She tried to stand, but her legs betrayed her again. She clutched the baby tighter. "Please," she rasped. "We don't mean no harm." The man said nothing. He dismounted in one slow motion, quiet as falling ash. He stood still, watching. Then, without a word, he reached in his saddlebag, drew out a strip of dried meat, and tossed it to the ground between them. Another motion, and a canteen followed. Water sloshed within. The boy hesitated. The woman nodded weakly. "Take it." The boy darted forward, scooped up the canteen, unscrewed the top with shaking hands. He drank, then handed it to his sister. She gulped too quickly and choked. The baby stirred as the woman raised the meat to her lips, teeth gnashing before she'd even torn a piece free. The man watched without expression. The wind caught his hair. It was long, tied back with a strip of hide, and streaked with dust. His eyes were dark, unreadable. His hands rested loosely at his sides, though not far from the knife strapped to his hip. She met his gaze, tried to speak, failed. Her throat worked uselessly. "I'm not sick," she managed at last. "Just hungry." Still he said nothing. The boy finished the water. The girl sat down in the dirt and closed her eyes, exhausted. The woman wiped her mouth, dared to take another bite. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with everything she had. The man turned and walked back to his horse. For a sick moment, she thought he would mount up and leave. But instead, he took the reins and led the animal toward the buttes, toward the smoke. He paused and looked back. A silent summons. She staggered upright. "Come on, babies," she whispered. "We follow." They walked in silence, the warrior leading, the broken family stumbling behind. The camp was small, one lean-to built of cedar poles and hides, nestled beside a rocky outcrop. A fire burned low, its coals red and steady. A clay pot simmered with a broth that smelled of rabbit and herbs. There were no signs of others. He handed her a bowl, rough, carved by hand, and motioned toward the stew. She didn't ask permission. She filled it halfway and gave it to the boy, then another for the girl. Only after they had eaten did she take a portion for herself. The broth burned going down, but it was the sweetest thing she had tasted in months. Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't known were waiting. Night fell quickly. The man tended the fire, adding wood with practiced care. He worked quietly, efficiently. She sat close to the flames with her children, warming their hands, drying their clothes. "Who are you?" she asked softly. No answer. "Why are you out here alone?" Still nothing. The baby stirred in her arms. She pressed her cheek to its forehead. Cool still. She murmured a lullaby without melody. The man pulled a hide from the lean-to and laid it near the fire. Then he turned, nodded toward it. "You want us to sleep there?" No reply. She hesitated. Her pride was a ragged thing, but it still kicked inside her. She had begged enough this past month to last a lifetime. "We can sleep outside. We'll be gone by morning." The man didn't look at her. He sat down by the fire, legs crossed, eyes on the flames. The girl spoke up, voice faint. "Mama, I don't want to leave. We can't stay where we ain't wanted." "But he fed us," the boy said. "That don't mean—" She stopped herself. A long moment passed. The man reached behind him, took another hide, and threw it across his own shoulders. He leaned back, the firelight flickering across the sharp lines of his face, the scars on his forearms. His profile was hard, weathered, alone. The woman laid the baby down on the offered blanket. The boy curled beside him, arms around the toddler's legs. The girl clutched her mother's arm. She sat awake long after they'd gone quiet, eyes on the man. "Thank you," she said again, "for not turning us away." He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. The wind outside the camp moaned like ghosts between the stones. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The fire popped and crackled, throwing sparks skyward. The woman closed her eyes. The ache in her back faded beneath the warmth of the hide, the gentle breathing of her children. The baby's chest rose and fell against hers. She didn't dream of angels. She dreamed of firelight. And for the first time in weeks, her babies breathed easy. Morning would bring questions, dangers. She knew that. The world didn't give kindness for free. But tonight, just tonight, she let herself rest. The warrior sat silent, watching the flames. His eyes flicked toward the sleeping family, toward the woman's pale hand, curled protectively around the youngest. He did not smile, but something shifted in his face, something barely there, a flicker. And when the fire hissed and dimmed, he rose, added more wood, and kept it burning till dawn. The sun broke over the buttes like a blade, slicing the horizon with its amber fire. Light spilled across the desert floor, turning the dry earth to gold, the sagebrush to silver. The morning was quiet, except for the stir of wind through the rocks and the gentle crackle of dying embers in the fire pit. She woke with her daughter's arm flung over her ribs and the baby warm against her chest. For a heartbeat, she thought she was back in Kansas, in their little wood frame house with its patched roof and crooked porch. Then the chill of the dawn hit her spine, and she opened her eyes to red rock, dust, and the lean-to that had saved them from the night wind. The warrior stood where he'd stood the night before, just beyond the fire, arms folded, watching the sun rise like it owed him something. He hadn't moved, or maybe he had, and she just missed it. Either way, he was there again, silent as stone. She sat up slowly, easing the baby onto a rolled hide. Her back screamed with stiffness, and her mouth was dry as cotton. The boy stirred beside her, rubbing grit from his eyes. "He didn't leave," the child said, surprised. "No," she murmured. "He didn't." The warrior turned then, just slightly, and nodded once. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement, one survivor to another. Then he walked to the fire pit and knelt, stirring the coals back to life with a flat rock. He added kindling. Smoke began to curl upward, faint and fragrant. "Mama," the girl whispered, "can we stay?" The woman didn't answer right away. Her eyes were on the warrior. He was gathering dried rabbit bones, piling them beside the fire, preparing a stew. She stood up, brushing grit from her skirts. Her feet were swollen. Her dress hung loose on her frame now. She'd lost weight fast. Too fast. She walked to the fire and crouched, not opposite the man, but beside him. He didn't look at her. "I don't know your name," she said quietly. Still nothing. "I'm not looking for charity. You saved us. I'll work. I can wash, cook, mend." No reply. The boy had risen too. He began walking the perimeter of the camp, eyes wide, searching for water, wood, anything to be useful. The girl clung to the baby, humming a tuneless note, rocking him back and forth. The warrior handed her a piece of smoked meat and pointed toward a rock near the fire. She understood the message: stay, eat, warm yourself. But something in her rebelled. She straightened, squared her shoulders. "I ain't here to be pitted," she said sharply. "If you want us gone, say so." He looked at her then, not startled, not angry, just still. "I do not want you gone," he said, voice deep and rough from disuse. She blinked. It was the first time she heard him speak. "Then say what you do want," she snapped. The warrior stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "You need rest. Your children need food. That is what I give." "Why?" she demanded. "Why us? There's 100 souls could use saving." He turned away, gaze sliding back to the horizon. "I once had a wife. She died hungry." The words hung between them, brittle as glass. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Her hand drifted to the baby's back, feeling the tiny chest rise and fall. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He didn't answer, just went back to feeding the fire. Later, he led the boy toward a rocky path flanked with brush and pointed down the trail. The boy looked up at him, wide-eyed. "You want me to come?" I nod. The woman tensed, rising fast. "Where are you taking him?" The warrior didn't turn. "To find water. You're not taking my son off alone." The boy cut her off, voice soft but firm. "Mama, he's trying to help." She hesitated, caught in the hot knot of fear and pride. "I'll go with you," she said. The warrior looked back, eyes measuring. Then he nodded again. They moved single file down the narrow canyon path, the man first, the boy in the middle, and her at the rear. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth. Lizards scattered beneath rocks. Buzzards circled high above, patient as time itself. They walked for nearly an hour before they reached the spring. It bubbled from a crack in the rock, feeding a shallow pool ringed with moss and reeds. The warrior knelt beside it, scooping the clear water with his hands, then offered some to the boy. She watched every move, tension singing through her body like wires stretched too tight. But the boy laughed, a dry, dusty sound that still sparkled like it used to. "It's cold," he said. "Real cold." She knelt too, filled a flask, splashed her face. Her reflection stared back at her in the water. Hollow cheeks, sunburnt nose, eyes rimmed with red. The warrior turned to leave. "Wait," she said. He paused. "You got a name?" A beat of silence. "Chogon," he said. "It means blackbird. Mine's Evelyn." He inclined his head. Then, without another word, he turned and headed back toward camp. That night, she sewed the rip in her daughter's dress with a sliver of bone and a shred of sinew. Her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. Chogon carved something by the fire, a whistle for the boy, a rattle for the baby. He never smiled, but when her daughter offered him a flower, crumpled and dry, he took it and placed it behind his ear without a word. Each day that passed, Evelyn began to understand his silence wasn't emptiness, it was weight. Everything he didn't say, he carried. But she carried weight too, and on the 6th day, that weight boiled over. She'd gone to the spring alone, a skin in her hand and a rifle slung across her back. It had been left behind at a way station, a forgotten thing she'd scavenged weeks ago. The rifle was rusted and light on powder, but it gave her back a sliver of control. She came back to find Chogon teaching her son how to notch an arrow. He wasn't hurting him. In fact, the boy looked proud, focused, but something in her snapped. Maybe it was the way her son mimicked the draw of the bow. Maybe it was the way the baby clapped when the girl cheered. Maybe it was that she didn't know what kind of world they were being led into, only that it was not the one they'd left. She stormed into the camp, rifle raised. "Put that down," she shouted. The children froze. Chogon turned slowly, standing. "He's a child," she hissed. "He's not your soldier." The boy tried to speak, but she cut him off. "You got no right teaching him things without a skimmy first." Chogon didn't flinch. He asked to learn. He doesn't know what he's a skin for. Chogon stepped forward. "I do not harm children." "That ain't the point," she snapped. "I've lost too much already. I ain't about to lose him too." A long silence fell. The fire popped. Chogon spoke quietly. "He is strong. He wants to be ready. If you wish him to stay weak, say it." The rifle trembled in her hands. "I wish him to be a boy," she whispered. "Just a boy. For a little while longer." Chogon looked at her then. Really looked. Not like a man stung by insult, but like someone staring at something long buried. "I was 7, he said, when soldiers came to our camp. My brother fought. He was 12. He died first." Evelyn's throat burned. The rifle lowered. "I never wanted to be a warrior," Chogon said. "But I had to be one. Your boy has a choice. Let him choose." Her knees gave. She sank to the dirt, the rifle slipping from her fingers. "I'm just tired," she said, tears cracking her voice. "I'm so damn tired of running, of fearing, of not knowing who'll take what little I got left." Chogon picked up the rifle, examined it, then handed it back. "I will not take," he said. "I will give. But only if you let me." She stared up at him, hair falling in her face. The firelight caught the edge of his jaw, the narrow scar down his neck. "You don't owe us nothing," she said. "No," he agreed. "But neither did you deserve what was taken." The baby began to cry. The girl ran to her, arms wrapping around her waist. The boy watched from the edge of the camp, arrow still in hand. Evelyn stood, brushing off her skirts. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. That night, she sat beside him by the fire. Not as a guest, not as a beggar, but as a woman with something still to protect. Chogon handed her a bowl of stew. She took it without a word. Together, they watched the flames rise and fall, and in the quiet between them, something began to shift. Not trust, not yet, but the shape of something like it. Out in the dark, a wolf howled, and for once it didn't sound like a threat. The morning came soft, like the touch of a mother's hand on a child's brow. But beneath the fragile beauty of the sunrise, the land was still hungry. The air had a bite, the wind sharp with the scent of dust and promise. The coyotes were quieter now, though the wolves, deep in the hills, howled with the kind of hunger only the wilderness knew. Evelyn woke to the sound of a child's cough, a hollow rasp that made her heart twist. Her daughter lay curled against the side of the campfire, clutching the baby as if she could keep him from the world's hunger. The boy had gone off before dawn, trailing Chogon, just as he had every morning since they'd found spring. They would gather wood. They would search for game. They would come back with whatever they could carry. It wasn't enough. She rubbed the back of her neck, feeling the strain that had settled there like a permanent weight. Life on the run had carved deep grooves into her, left her bones brittle. But it wasn't the fatigue that stung her soul today. It was the hunger, the gnawing emptiness in her gut, in her children's bellies, in the very bones of this place. The fire had died down to embers, the last bits of heat fading into the crisp air. She stood, folding her blanket with slow, practiced motions. She didn't need to look for Chogon and know he would be back soon. The boy was strong, and the warrior, silent as ever, was a good tracker. He'd find something, no matter how small, to keep them going for another day, another meal. But that wasn't enough either. It wasn't enough to survive. It wasn't enough to live. She moved to the edge of the camp, staring at the horizon. The hills, craggy and wild, stood like sentinels, looming, watching, waiting. And for the first time since they'd come to this cursed place, Evelyn felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, heavy as the sky itself. The woman's throat tightened. She had no more tears left to shed, no more strength to gather. She was hollow, and yet she had to keep going. For them. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie. She turned to see Chogon and the boy returning, both of them looking tired, their faces grim. The boy's hands were empty. I couldn't find any, the boy said, dropping his gaze. Cho'Gawn stood beside him, arms folded. The land is bare. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She couldn't. The words felt like a fist in her throat. The boy had tried. He had given his best, just like he always did. But it was never enough. The warrior didn't offer any comfort, no hollow promises of things getting better. He just stood there, his dark eyes steady, his face unreadable. That was all. And in that silence, Evelyn knew that the world was closing in on them faster than they could outrun it. The wind picked up, and the girl shivered. Evelyn walked over and knelt beside her, brushing the dirt from her cheeks, trying to warm her with the little she had left. The baby stirred in her arms, but he didn't cry. He hadn't cried in days. There was nothing left for him to say. Cho'Gawn, Evelyn finally said, her voice thick with something she didn't want to name. We can't stay here. Not like this. He didn't answer at first, but when he spoke, his voice was low, almost to himself. There are no other places to go. She stood, fists clenched. Then what were we supposed to do? Just wait for death to come. A shadow passed over his face, but he didn't speak. There was no need. He knew exactly what she meant. The boy stood nearby, eyes darting between them, watching. He didn't fully understand the weight of what she was asking, but he felt it. He felt the tension crackling in the air. Maybe, she continued, voice trembling with something like desperation, maybe it's time to leave. Go to a town. Maybe there's something there. Shogun's gaze didn't shift. He was already scanning the horizon again, his eyes sharp and calculating. And what would we do in a town? He asked. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words felt empty. They didn't have enough to barter. No skills to offer. They were just a woman and her children, scraps of people clinging to a life they hadn't made. We can't keep living like this, she said finally, a bitter edge to her voice. We can't. The silence between them was thick with the unsaid things neither of them wanted to face. But it wasn't until the howling started that Evelyn knew the wolves had come down from the hills. It started as a single cry, distant and thin, but it was quickly joined by others. A chorus of hunger, of wild things searching for food, for blood. Cho'Gawn turned sharply, his face unreadable. He pulled his rifle from his back, eyes scanning the edges of the camp. Stay close, he said, voice low, sharp as a whip. The boy's eyes widened. Are they coming for us? Cho'Gawn didn't answer. He was already moving toward the rocks, crouching low, his gaze fixed on the dark shapes moving just beyond the edge of the firelight. The wolves were coming closer, their howls filling the air, growing louder. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest. She didn't need to ask what Cho'Gawn was thinking. The wolves wouldn't stop at just a meal. They would take everything if they could. Her breath hitched, and she quickly moved to gather her children. The girl had gone quiet, clutching the baby in her arms, her wide eyes fixed on the shadows creeping toward them. Stay behind me, Evelyn whispered, though she wasn't sure it would matter. The wolves came closer. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of their musk and hunger, their coats thick and matted with the dirt of the hills. They were close now, too close. Evelyn's grip tightened around the baby, her body moving of its own accord. She wasn't sure what she would do if the wolves attacked. She had nothing left to protect them with. No weapon, no means of defense. But Cho'Gawn was already there, rifle raised, his stand solid. The boy stood beside him, trying to mimic the warrior's posture, his small face set with determination. The first wolf came into view, its fur streaked with mud and blood. Its eyes gleamed in the firelight, and its teeth were sharp, glistening white. It paused, sniffing the air, and then, as if deciding they were no threat, it stepped closer. Behind it, another wolf emerged, larger, more menacing. And then more. 3, 4. Shogun's rifle cracked, a loud, sharp sound that split the night. The lead wolf yelped and stumbled back, the others following in a frantic retreat. Evelyn's heart pounded in her ears, but the wolves didn't retreat far. They circled, tails low, watching. It was only a matter of time. Cho'Gawn turned to her then, his face hard, his jaw clenched. They're waiting for a weakness, he said. We can't stay here. Not like this. The words hit her like a blow. Her chest tightened with the force of her realization. They had no choice. No choice at all. She turned to the boy, who was still standing there, staring at the wolves, his face pale but resolute. "Get the horses," she ordered, her voice shaking but determined. The boy nodded, darting toward the pack of horses tied at the far edge of the camp. He didn't look back. Evelyn grabbed her daughter's hand, pulling her close. The baby was still mercifully quiet in her arms. She could feel the tension in the air, so thick it was choking her. But there was no time to think, no time to wonder if they would make it through. Cho'Gan stood in front of them, rifle raised. The wolves were getting closer again, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. His gaze didn't waver. Evelyn took a breath and glanced toward the horizon. It was time to run. Just as the first wolf lunged, the boy returned with the horses, one of them already saddled. Cho'Gan fired again, and the beast fell, but the others charged forward in a frenzy. "We ride!" Cho'Gan shouted. Evelyn didn't wait. She pushed her children toward the horses and scrambled onto one herself. The warrior took the reins of the second, and the boy jumped onto the third, urging it forward. The wolves were closing in, but Cho'Gan was already galloping ahead, leading the way. They rode like the wind, through the night, away from the hills, away from the wolves. The firelight flickered low, casting long shadows that stretched across the rough-hewn walls of the small, makeshift shelter they had found nestled in the hollows of a canyon. Evelyn watched the flames dance, their orange glow flickering against the darkness. She could hear the wind outside howling, the promise of more wolves lingering on the edges of the night. But inside, there was a strange, uneasy calm. The children huddled close to her, their small bodies pressed into the warmth of the fire. They were all too tired to speak, too weary to even ask questions. The baby, who had cried for days on end, finally slept soundly in her arms, his fevered body now cool to the touch. His quietness, a blessing and a curse, only made the silence more pronounced. Cho'Gan sat across from them, his gaze fixed on the fire, his face impassive. His posture was one of quiet strength, but Evelyn could sense the tension beneath it. She had known him long enough to understand that he carried the weight of this world in ways that were invisible to most. It was in his silence, the careful way he watched for threats, the way he listened to the wind as if it spoke in a language only he understood. But tonight, there was something different, a heaviness in the air that settled around them, thick and suffocating. The wolves were gone, but the land they rode through was wild and untamed, full of dangers that had no name. "Cho'Gan," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. Her voice was hoarse, worn thin from days of travel and hunger. "We can't keep running." He didn't look at her, but she could feel the shift in his body, the subtle way his muscles tensed. He was already thinking it, the same thing she had been turning over in her mind for days. "We need to find a place," she continued, her words quieter now. "We need a home." He finally turned his eyes to her, his gaze dark, unreadable. "There is no place." His words were blunt, but she could hear the weight behind them. It was true. There were no safe places. Not for people like them. Not for a woman with 3 children and a warrior who wore the past like a second skin. The fire crackled, and the night pressed in around them. Evelyn's heart tightened. She had never known a life without fear. A life without this kind of uncertainty. Even before her husband's death, she had known the world to be a place of loss and survival. But she had never known the kind of survival that stripped you bare, that forced you to choose between living and existing. She couldn't keep existing. Not like this. "Cho'Gan," she said again, and this time there was something softer in her voice. Something that felt more like a plea than a demand. "You can't keep running either." His jaw clenched. She saw his hand tighten on the worn hilt of his knife, the only weapon left to him now. His rifle had been lost days ago, along with the last of their provisions. His dark eyes never left hers, but there was a flicker of something there, something like regret or weariness. "I don't have a choice," he muttered, his voice low. Evelyn's heart beat faster. She could see it now, the thing he had been holding back, the thing he had carried for so long, the thing he couldn't shake off, the past, the violence, the blood that ran like rivers through his history. "You don't have to be alone," she said, her voice raw. "Not anymore." He looked away from her, his gaze fixed on the fire again. But it wasn't the same. She saw the way he trembled slightly, the way his fingers twitched, as if he were fighting something inside himself. "You don't know what I've done," he said, almost to himself. Evelyn's heart ached. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that it didn't matter. But the words wouldn't come. She knew what he meant. She had seen it in his eyes. The shadow of something terrible, something unforgiven. He was a warrior, a man who had lived by the blade, who had killed without mercy. She had seen that, and she knew it wasn't something you could simply wash away. It was the thing that haunted him, the thing that made him so silent, so distant. But she also knew this. No one could live a life without a future. No one could carry their ghosts forever. "Maybe I don't," she said softly. "But I know what it's like to lose everything. To stand on the edge of nothing and wonder if you'll ever feel the sun on your face again." He was silent, his gaze never leaving the fire. She could feel the weight of his thoughts, heavy and sharp. She didn't press him. She knew better than to ask him to share what he wasn't ready to speak of. Instead, she gathered the children closer, the boy, the girl, the baby, all of them too young to understand the depths of the choices they were making, too innocent to see the way the world worked. But she had to protect them. She had to make sure they didn't lose the hope that still flickered inside them, no matter how dim it seemed. As the night wore on, Chogon remained silent, his eyes never straying from the fire. He hadn't spoken in hours. Evelyn could see his mind working, his emotions locked away like the secrets of the earth. But as the hours passed, she noticed a change in him, a subtle shift that was hard to pinpoint, but undeniable. He was thinking, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, the words thick with something ancient, something heavy. "I can't promise anything, but I'll fight for you, for them." Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected nothing. And yet this, the promise of something, of an answer that wasn't silence, meant more than she could have ever known. For the first time since they had crossed into this strange wilderness, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. A stirring of hope, like a flame catching the wind, fragile but real. The night stretched on, the hours slipping past as the wind howled and the fire crackled in its dying light. The world outside was still wild, still uncaring. But inside their little shelter, something had changed. The air was thick with the promise of something different, something more. But just as Evelyn was about to close her eyes, to let herself drift into a sleep that felt too heavy, too uncertain, there came a sound, a faint rustling from the edge of the camp. She was on her feet before she even realized it, her heart pounding, her mind already scrambling for a weapon. But then the shape appeared in the doorway. Shogun's eyes flickered toward it, his body tensing. "Who goes there?" he asked sharply, the warrior rising to the surface. And then the shape stepped forward into the firelight, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, a stranger. His face was covered in dust, his clothes tattered, his eyes wild with a kind of desperation that mirrored her own. "I need your help," he said, his voice trembling. "I've got nowhere else to go." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. In the wilderness, there were no second chances. There was no mercy. And yet, there was something in this man's eyes that stirred something deep inside her. Shogun's hand went to his knife, his gaze never leaving the stranger. Evelyn hesitated, her mind racing. They had no choice but to decide. And in that moment, everything they had struggled for, their survival, their future, their fight, hung in the balance.